Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to be talking about some of the books that I have given a high star rating, which is 4 or 5 stars. I really wanted this year to do a mid-year sort of favourites list, but the way my life is set up, I don't know if I'll be doing that. So I thought I would just do this and talk about some books that I have been really loving. I would say I've got a bit of a range in here. I've got a short story collection, I've got a non-fiction book. I think that's it, and the rest are all fiction, but yeah, a bit of a range. I'm only going to talk about 5 books anyway. So the first book I'm going to speak about is Little Gold by Ali Rogers. I wasn't expecting to like this, I'm not going to lie. I didn't think I would like it. I've put off reading it for like, I think 2 years now. Maybe a year and a half, that's probably the closest estimation. No, I think it would be nearly 2 years. But I ended up really enjoying this. I gave this 4 stars. Little Gold is about a girl called Little Gold. We never actually find out what her real name is. And she's growing up in Brighton in like 1982. I was about to say that 1842. It's not that far behind. And she grows up in this town. She's got an older brother and an older sister, and her dad has left the family like maybe 2 years prior to the sort of start of this story. And her mum is really struggling. Her mum is an alcoholic. She is addicted to sort of pain prescription meds. And basically her sister looks after her. And within the family there's a whole cocktail of issues going on. There are sort of themes of trigger warnings perhaps, or mental illness, but specifically to do with eating disorders. Sugar's in here for sexual abuse. It's not on page at all, but there is something that happens somewhere in the book that, you know, you might want to brace yourself for. But like I said, it's not on screen, it's not on page, and it's not graphic. And yeah, there's a whole host of different things going on within the family. Everyone is just trying to find their way to cope with the sort of dysfunction that they find themselves in. Unfortunately for Little Gold, there is a neighbour called Peggy Baxter who seems to like notice Little Gold. Little Gold likes to like go climbing in trees. So I think Little Gold is around the age of like 12 or 13. She is heavily bullied at school because, you know, kids can just be horrible. They like, you know, when I say that there's like dysfunction, there's a lot of like poverty in here as well, and just the lack of food to eat, regular washing of clothes, because their mum is just so comatose. Like, she's either going to work or she's at home completely comatose and not going to work. They're behind on their bills and everything like that. So life is not great for them. It's not great for Little Gold. And Peggy Baxter sort of notices Little Gold and starts inviting her around. In the beginning, I thought it was going to be a little bit creepy. You know, this old lady just inviting this girl around to her house. I don't know why. I feel like the character even sort of makes references to that. I'm just a bit like, what's going to happen here? But it's not that. And yeah, really, she gets Little Gold to like help her around the house, but you know, she feeds her during these times, and it's just like, oh, like I've got these pack of biscuits, I don't really like them, like you have them. And yeah, it just really gives this girl a sense of like somewhere to be, but not in a really overbearing way. There's also the element in here of sexuality. I think Little Gold is someone who is finding that actually she's not attracted to boys, she is attracted to girls. And I guess fortunately for her, Peggy Baxter is someone who has had a life in which I guess it would make her bisexual. I don't know if later she would identify as being a lesbian, but she has, I think, her longest relationship and her overarching feeling has always been for women. And you know, she doesn't ever explicitly really talk about it with Little Gold, but there is a sense, there's a sort of conversation that happens at one point when she's just showing her old pictures from like her life when she was younger, and those pictures happen to feature a lot of women, and it just sort of explores the fact that you can have feelings for women and those feelings aren't wrong. So there's just so much in here tied to the sort of exploration of Little Gold's sort of coming of age. And it's just very touching. You read about all these things from either Little Gold's perspective or Peggy's perspective, and you sort of see, at least from Little Gold's perspective, her sort of protectiveness over her family, especially her older brother Malcolm, who's being sucked into something that's so terrible, so sad. You know, it's not like gang life or anything like that, but into something that she cannot control, and she can't tell an adult. She just has an uneasy feeling. And yeah, she's just very protective of her brother, protective of her family, and really wants, I don't know, their lives to change. It was just such a touching story, and I thought it was really well written, really well paced, really well balanced. And actually I just wish a lot more people would have read this. I say this as someone who like did not read it, would never have heard of it unless it had been dropped sort of, I didn't say where I found this. I found this like during Pride Month, like nearly 2 years ago in King's Cross. So yeah, I wouldn't have found it otherwise, but I just bloody loved it, and it's just not something that I even expected that I would like, so I'm so glad that I finally picked it up. The other book on my list is The Shapeless Unease for You of Not Sleeping by Samantha Harvey. I gave this 4 stars, and I don't know if I said for Little Gold, but I also gave that 4 stars. This is a non-fiction book about, I guess, Samantha Harvey's experience of not sleeping for a year, and basically her experience of her insomnia, what that was like for her, talking to doctors, talking to people, like basically trying to fucking sleep. A lot of it, I think, deals with sort of her interactions with doctors, and there's a sort of like made up scene where I guess she talks to maybe like a psychiatrist or I don't know, a counsellor or something like that, and sort of imagines like what they would write about her on like her patient form and stuff like that. And then there are also snippets in here of a sort of short story that she started on, and then she talks about like in other snippets of the book about that short story and like how did that even come about. It's just such a mixed bag, and I think it's one of those things that you can do, I guess, when you're an author who has like an established like back catalogue. You can sort of write this little bit of non-fiction which, you know, is a bit like prose, bit of rambles and things like that, but effectively about your struggles with sleeping. I really enjoyed it because personally a lot of the things that she said about how she felt about not sleeping and the anxiety, the anger, the anguish, the sadness about it, I got a lot of it. Like that's how I feel a lot of the time about my sleep. So for me it was really nice to read something that acknowledged those feelings, and I was just like, so it's not just me. So I honestly really enjoyed this. It's not the kind of book that you could recommend to everyone, because like honestly it's just personal rambles. If you don't have like a personal affinity with Samantha Harvey and her writing, you probably wouldn't be interested in it, and even if you did, you might not be. I think for someone who perhaps struggles with sleep and wants to find some sort of solace from other people who struggle with sleep, I think this would be like the perfect book. It's got no hints in there for you for how to sleep, not gonna lie. But I think if you just want that comfort of it's not just me, then this is a great book for you. So another book I have given 4 stars is this short story collection, which is Shut Up You're Pretty by Taya Montargis. I think I only spoke about this book in a TBR video, and then I've spoken about it in my recent book haul. I gave this 4 stars. Did I say that? My memory is fading. I enjoyed this. Like, this book got darker with every single story, but I wasn't expecting that, but honestly I really enjoyed it. I liked the writing, I liked the evolution of the character. You know, she's growing up, she reaches adulthood, she's experiencing all these things, and then there's this sort of come down, not rock bottom or anything like that, but this sort of realization of life, and I just thought it was elegantly done. I thought this book was like really actually quite a masterpiece. The only reason I didn't give it 5 stars in all honesty was because, like I said, it was really dark. I felt like really sad for the character, and I was just like, this is a lot to deal with. This is a collection of short stories that deals with one main character. I can't remember her name in all honesty, but her and her family moved from Congo to Canada, and the sort of first chapter is their sort of moving, how everything is different, and then how they meet sort of other people on the area that they're living in, and particularly how she meets one girl and sort of how her life and I guess her friendship goes from there. And like, it's definitely a case of people, those are poor people living in an area, like a rundown area, and it's just to do about life there. And then it gradually sort of develops into the sort of habits I guess these girls pick up in terms of like smoking, drinking, performing acts on each other for the attention of boys, but like not so they can get attention from boys. They use it, they monetize it, they're very clever about it, they realise they can get money doing this, and the sort of gradual progression of where that leads them both in life. And for our main character, it leads her down to sort of some sort of, you know, adult entertainment things, I would say, and then sort of things that she does to support herself during college and her relationships with other men. It's very dark as it goes along. You realise like how many factors are at play, especially because you've witnessed them sort of from the beginning, and you get to see them play out as she becomes older. It deals with some really dark stuff in terms of like death of a family member and just how that is written about, but also interacting with different parts of her family and just sort of getting to know Congolese traditions a bit more, especially because I think the character feels like she's very alienated from that, especially since she's moved to Canada. And then yeah, it just, so many different things happen that are such marked moments, such sad, poignant moments, and I just like the balance in which the author wrote about them, but also the way our character experienced them. What I liked about this book is the beginning is sort of, you know, the family coming there, and the end is sort of a return to her family, to her mother, to her traditions, and you just get this sense of weariness from the character of all that she's experiencing. She wants to come home and feel something safe, and that's what I mean by the sort of journey that we go on. We see her sort of go up on this high, and then there's just this sort of gentle lull as I guess life and the weariness of life hits her. I thought this was just masterfully crafted and I really enjoyed it. Another book I want to speak about is The Gilded Ones by Namina Fauna. I have actually written a review for this on Goodreads. I got this as a NetGalley art. I really enjoyed this. This is a YA fantasy book and that is not a genre that I read in at all. But this was a book I definitely enjoy and it's part of a series. I don't know how many books are going to be in the series. If it's a trilogy, if it's a duology, I don't know if it's a full-on series. Me not know. This follows a main character named Decca who is approaching her sort of blood ceremony. You know, that's how they do these things. And I think in the ceremony it's basically like if your blood runs red, you're a woman, you're allowed to pass on through your life and continue being oppressed. And if your blood runs gold, you're basically a demon. Decca doesn't even get to the ceremony. Like something happens and these death shrieks start attacking the village and she basically turns into some big-eyed monster or something like that. And they realise this girl is not human. And so she's sort of caged up and someone comes and says, this woman that she names White Hands, and basically says, I can take you away from all of this, and sort of bargains with like her captors to be like, you know, she's a dirty little demon, but we're going to take her somewhere else where we train them to make them fight for us. Let me take her. And that's basically what happens. And so Decca ends up going to this training school, and on the journey towards the training school she meets this other girl. I want to say her name is Bertha. I don't really remember what her name is, but I'll put it across the screen. And honestly, it's so funny to me because my one criticism, I think they're two criticisms of the book, but my first criticism of the book is this character. She speaks like she is either like Scottish or somewhere in the north of England. And I don't know why when this book is like set in West Africa. I'm just like, where did this character come from? And she's the only one that speaks like that. Everyone else speaks normally. So I'm like, but anyway, so yeah, they get to this training school and there's a whole bunch of them that are all sort of pulled on from the four corners of this country or the globe, I don't know, and turned into these warriors. And they go out and basically there's this thing called death shrieks, which are, I don't know how to imagine them. I don't really have a great imagination, but things that go around just basically stealing young girls from villages, and they need, well, the world that they're living in has decided that these death shrieks are dangerous and they need to be eliminated. So they use these warriors, these girls, which they call lackeys, to get rid of them. And basically girls like Decca are lackeys, and they have strong strength and they don't die easily. So you can kill them many times and they won't die. They only die when you sort of kill them, like in basically like their Achilles heel or something, but you don't know what their Achilles heel is until it happens, and then they have their final death. Of course, Decca is our chosen one. She is our oddball out of everyone, and she has these special powers, and she is actually able to control the death shrieks. So the story is about the evolution of this power and sort of Decca discovering actually what this power means and why she's able to control the death shrieks. As the story progresses, like mainly towards the last 75% of the story, like there is a twist and you find out sort of more about the death shrieks, their sort of things behind them. You find out a lot more about the world they're living in, and it really just touches on things to do with femininity, past wars, building, like I would say like building gods. It reminds me a lot of Greek mythology in that sense, like in the sense of like the Titans really is what it reminds me of. But there isn't really much more I can tell you about the story without ruining it, but I definitely encourage people to read it. Obviously if you read a lot of YA fantasy, like you make up your mind about where it stands amongst all the other ones that you did, but I think there's definitely a strong sense in here of the fact that these are people of colour. They come from so many different globes, they have different features, and yeah, you just get a feel that it's a very diverse cast. And there is definitely a lot of like strong women in here, women who have been through ish, you know, and these are like women, like girls who are on the brink of womanhood, in fact, so it's even girls who have been through shit. And one of the sort of complaints I see a lot about this is that it's very graphic in its violence, and it's not really for a YA audience. And I just sort of have to be like, well, this author sort of wrote this after, I think she is either from Sierra Leone or like her family were living there, but witnessed a lot of violence there. And I think this is to do with when the country was at war. So for a lot of young people, this is their reality. So for me, I personally didn't find it very violent, but I lack a lot of imagination. I could read what was going on and understand it, but yeah, I guess be aware of that if you're someone who can't read a lot of graphic violence, that perhaps isn't for you. But I wouldn't say that because of that it's not for a YA audience. It's perhaps not for a YA Western audience, which is a shame because that's where this book is definitely going to be marketed to. but I don't think it nulls and voids it being for a white A audience. So the final book I'm going to speak about is A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. Now I would have picked up The Long Small Way to an Angry Planet, but I know where that is, and I've already done a book review on that, and you guys already know I love that. I gave this 4 stars, and I was really surprised that I gave it 4 stars, because when I first started reading it I was like, oh, I don't really care about these characters and their storylines. But the more I read into it, I was just so sucked into the world and finding out more of what happened. So the Becky Chambers series are set in like the same universe, but they don't follow the same characters, except in this book we're following the AI from the ship in the previous book and one of the characters who is a friend of one of the characters in the previous book. So we're following Lovelace and Pepper. Pepper, it turns out, is, I can't remember what she actually is. I think she's some sort of bald-headed person. Pepper was born Jane 23, part of a slave class created by a rogue society of genetic engineers. At 10 years old, she has never seen the sky, but when an industrial accident gave Jane 23 a chance to escape, she jumped at the opportunity to leave. So that's what Pepper is. And then Lovelace is the AI who has been transformed into a body kit and essentially looks like a real as human, I suppose, out of all the different species there are. It's the closest one that I can relate it to. And so the wonderful connection between this is Pepper takes, I guess, pity on Lovelace, or, you know, takes her into her because she was brought up by an AI. When she escapes sort of the place that she's living in, the rogue society she's living in, she ends up finding a ship and is raised by this AI named Owl. And, you know, she grows from, I think, like 13 to 18 there until they sort of take off, until she's able to build the ship and they take off to another place. That isn't a spoiler, by the way. You pretty much like know that because you know Jane is in like a different, well, Pepper is in a different place. So, you know, in order for her to be there, she needs to have gotten out of the place that she was in before. And she's basically trying to help Lovelace acclimatise to this new society. And, you know, that just brings up loads of questions. It brings up loads of questions about Lovelace and her purpose and what she was created for and the things that she's used to doing. The story basically alternates between Pepper Jane when she is younger and as she grows up, and in between her chapters are the chapters of Lovelace and how she's sort of dealing with things in the present day. It's basically an adventure of loads of different things. I really enjoyed this. I thought I wasn't going to because I was just like, I don't really care about the AI and how she feels in a body kit. But I think it does present very interesting questions. It doesn't go as far as it could do with the AI side, but I just don't think that's what like Becky Chambers was really trying to like present with this book. I found as I was reading this, I was really interested in Pepper Jane's sort of involvement and just how she lived day to day. I would have loved like a whole book on that. I would have happily read that. And I think that's where sort of my like love for this book really came from. I was just like, I'm actually more interested in this side of the story, and I didn't even think I would be. Like, I didn't even know I'd be getting this, and then I was really happy when I got that. So yes, I think did I say this before? I gave this 4 stars as well. I gave the first book of this series 4 stars, and then I read the third one and I gave that 2 stars, really 1.5, but so I'm patiently waiting for the paperback version of the 4th book. But those are all the books that I've read recently that I've given high ratings. I realised I've given them all 4 stars. Like, I'm just not that bitch that gives out 5 stars. I probably do have books that I've given out 5 stars, but I can't think of any of them off the top of my head. But that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you in another one. Bye!